So I'm going to take you through what we're calling selective stacking. We've seen streaming stacking accelerate during COVID, and we kept waiting for things to plateau. But even with inflation, service stacking continues, but consumers are being more selective as they kind of perfect their individual media stacks. So while stacking continues, people are still moving away from traditional cable. This chart is from Nielsen, and it's showing TV distribution from January 22 to January 23. And you can see in just 1 year, broadband-only households grew 22%. And while subscription video on demand, or SVOD, saw minimum growth at 2%, it has the largest reach at 83%. But obviously, the piece that we care about when we talk about SVOD is the AVOD portion, or the ad-supported video on demand. And currently, 45% of the population are users or viewers of AVOD, meaning we actually have the opportunity to reach them with our ads. And we'll get into AVOD a little bit later in our presentation. So it's interesting when we were putting this slide together, we had used the chart at the top right in a previous presentation. And when we were looking at it before, it looked like the chart was starting to plateau toward the end of 2021. But you can see the number of services people subscribe to continues to grow. So it hasn't quite reached that plateau yet. But if you look at the chart at the bottom, you can see the growth in consumers who subscribe to 5 or more services has kind of slowed. So we saw a huge jump of 34% from December 2020 to June 2021, but from 21 to 22, it was only a 7% increase. And another thing to keep in mind is the cancellation rate of streaming services, and it's pretty much held steady at 5%. And most of this is a result of value, which is increasingly important to retaining streamers. Nearly 1 in 3 planned cancellations are now driven by wanting to save money, with another 15% driven by price increases of streaming subscriptions. And we all know about Netflix. They were trying to reduce their own churn rate, and they were hoping their AVOD service, which launched back in November, would be the solution. So far, Netflix hasn't really seen the expected results. Netflix Basic with ads accounts for just 12% of its subscriber base, and the $3 savings wasn't really enticing enough to win new subscribers over. So we know everyone is streaming, and as an agency, we're constantly looking at what Nielsen calls the gauge. This is a monthly report that they release, and each month, the chart illustrates who's grabbing the most screen time between broadcast, cable, and streaming. Typically, we look at 1 month in a vacuum, but here we're looking at the trend over 13 months. And what really stood out is starting in July of 2022, where you can see the little green box, streaming accounted for more share than cable, and it's continued to maintain more share through December. The other notable piece of this is back in September, we saw the first FAST, which another acronym I'm going to throw at you, is free ad-supported streaming TV. So we saw our first FAST service break into our reporting with Pluto accounting for 1%. So I can just throw an acronym at you without talking about it. So streamers are now becoming more receptive and embracing ads. And when streaming first started, we had Netflix, we had Prime, but nothing really offered ads. And part of the initial allure of streaming was the idea of being ad-free and on demand, putting the user in total control. But now as people have continued to stack services, we're finding that more people are receptive to ads, especially if they're limited or they can save them money. So the chart is showing the growth of OTT in general and then within specific areas. So you can see AVOD is expected to see 84% growth and free premium or FAST 81%. And currently 50% of paid streaming subscribers are now using FAST services. And like I said, we throw so many acronyms around, it's easy to get lost in this. So I just wanted to take a step back to kind of talk about FAST. So FAST includes companies like Tubi, Pluto, Roku, Freevee, or Xumo. And there's many others out there, but I think those are the biggies that kind of ring a bell. But they offer news, entertainment, sports, and more in an environment that mimics linear TV. So the difference between AVOD and FAST is the fact that FAST mimics the old days of cable, where you would use the guide to surf for what you want to watch, and you join a program that's already in progress. Whereas AVOD, it still has ads, but it's more on demand, allowing the user to select what they want to watch when they want to watch it from the beginning, instead of tuning in as it's airing. So we know streaming continues to be a growing and evolving trend, but another trend we're seeing as there's more focus on Gen Z is the growth of short form and a shift in what video means to different people. So this chart's looking at Gen Z, which here is defined as people 13 to 24, and we're comparing that to adults 35 plus. Gen Z spends 8% less time with video than adults 35 plus, but the time split a little more evenly between TV and non-premium video. And in this specific survey, non-premium video was really that user-generated content, like videos on YouTube, TikTok, influencer videos, content on Twitch. So while most of us would sit down to watch Summer House on Peacock or Perfect Match on Netflix, Gen Z settles in and they binge several user-generated videos in the same way. So not surprisingly, majority of this entertainment screen time, or 30% for Gen Z, takes place on a smartphone. And why is all of this relevant? Well, in order to hook younger audiences who grew up in seconds-long TikTok videos and Instagram stories, mainstream entertainment might have to get quicker. Gen Z respondents claim that their TV viewing actually decreased as a result of the time that they're spending with non-premium video. So you can see it really is taking the place of their typical TV viewing habits. Every year, if you've had the opportunity to join us in the past for these trends presentations, we talk about addressable TV and look at the increased ad spend. But the biggest takeaway we wanted to kind of touch on this year was the fact that more TV is addressable than not nowadays. When you think about streaming audiences and how it's expanding, and a larger proportion of remaining linear households are addressable enabled, there's more people we have a chance to reach with addressable. So 66.4 million US households subscribe to pay TV, and 82% are addressable enabled. So this is great for us, right? It means we can target who we want to have, who we want to reach. We have a better chance of honing in on that target. But there's also a downside or a complicated piece with addressable and with streaming in general as fragmentation grows. And this is the idea of trying to measure all screens all the time. So we know that there's a need for cross-platform measurement, and we continue to struggle with who has the best offering, what do they actually measure, what's the methodology behind everything, and there's so many questions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to answer all of those today. But I am going to give you some information just to let you know that it's an ongoing issue that everybody in the industry is facing. So the first piece of this is understanding the difference between currency and measurement, because these two terms are being thrown around so much now. And I'm actually going to borrow these definitions from Innovid, but I thought that they were straight to the point and easy to understand. So currency is the measurement that buyers and sellers agree upon to use in transactions. And then measurement is much broader. So it encompasses not only currency, but actionable cross-platform reach, outcomes, and audience insights that are used to inform and optimize the video mix. And then the next piece is understanding measurement and where we go from here. This is an ongoing issue for everyone, and there's the need for cross-platform measurement and some sort of standardization. So the first US Joint Industry Committee, or JIC, you'll probably hear that acronym quite a bit moving forward if you haven't already, but the first JIC formed in January 2023 to enable multiple currencies with the primary focus of creating a measurement certification process to establish the suitability of emerging cross-platform measurement solutions ahead of the 2024 upfront. And that's a mouthful, so let's just talk about what some of the goals are for the JIC. They've established 4 goals moving forward to establish and maintain a measurement certification process in partnership with the VAB, create a program or data set, engage a third-party audit firm to verify the accuracy of the streaming viewership, and to collaborate with the VAB and ANA to accelerate progress. And then on April 25th, the JIC is expected to host an event to share a first look at the progress being made. So stay tuned for more information on that. So we've spent a lot of time talking about video, and now even as we move into discussing audio, we're still talking about video. Video has become such a huge piece of our lives that it's everywhere. Podcasts have been playing on the power of video, and this chart's showing the different breakouts of adults, with the dark blue representing those who listen to podcasts without video, and the light blue are those who listen with video. You'll notice the highest percentage of podcast listeners who listen with video are comprised of Gen Z and millennials. Overall, 46% of podcast listeners prefer to listen to a podcast with video. And because so many people are now watching podcasts, it makes sense that 1 in 3 podcast listeners prefer YouTube as their podcast platform, which we'll see again in a few slides. It's also rumored that TikTok is anticipated to release its own podcast app to try to get in on the action. So digging into podcasts a little bit more, each year we talk about the growth in podcasts, and this year one of our favorite reports, the Share of Ear report, compared Q3 of 2017 to Q3 of 2022. And you can see adults 18 to 34 saw a 100% increase, but adults 25 to 54 nearly tripled. And those who are listening to podcasts are consuming more podcasts. And the one thing that I found interesting while I was digging into podcasts myself is that podcast listeners hear the same ad somewhere between 3.5 to 6.3 times, according to Podsight's data from Q3 22. And while we always want to be cognizant of not overloading someone with the same ad repeatedly, it becomes challenging with listeners like me who subscribe to a premium audio service. So I still hear live reads, which makes it difficult to track how many times I've heard the same ad. The good thing is 82% of podcast listeners say they're likely to look into a product or service being advertised during a podcast. And I'm always guilty of this. I think my ongoing obsession is Solo Stove, one of my favorite podcast hosts and comedians. He talks about his Solo Stove, and not only does he read the ad, but he tells his own testimonial about why he loves it so much. So I haven't pulled the trigger just yet to buy one, but I'm sure as soon as I see all my neighbors outside with their fire pits, I'll be pulling the trigger myself. And when we talk about podcast listeners, over 80% prefer to use the same service to listen to both music and podcasts. We saw earlier how 1 in 3 podcast listeners prefer YouTube, so it's no surprise that YouTube takes the top space as the preferred service for both music and podcasts, followed by Spotify. But the biggest takeaway here is majority of people utilize the same service for both podcasts and music, but it doesn't mean that people aren't in favor of stacking and using multiple services when it comes to audio, which we'll see on the next slide. So we spend so much time each year talking about streaming stacking with video, but consumers are starting to do the same thing with audio. In 2022, 64% of music listeners utilized 2 or more services, and this was up from 44% in 2019. These figures do include free and paid services, but as subscription fees increase, this could lead people to work on perfecting their audio stack in a similar way that we're seeing with video. Subscription fees have already increased for YouTube and Apple Music as a result of increased licensing fees, and Spotify is expected to increase its fees as well this year. With audio platforms working to establish incentives for their listeners, they're working on ways to draw consumers in. So for example, I am a Spotify user. I listen to pretty much all music and podcasts with Spotify, but I recently started using Amazon Music for one of my favorite podcasts because it's now offered ad-free. So while stacking is lighter on the audio side, I would anticipate seeing services come out with various offerings, including exclusive podcasts or ad-free content to try to draw more listeners in. So to sum everything up, here are 3 takeaways from everything we just went through. First, stacking continues for both audio and video. Even with people cutting back in other areas and looking to save money, no one's willing to lose their content. While consumers will be more selective about their stacking, expect services to continue taking tiered or bundled approaches. Video is a huge piece of things. It's now made its way into audio. So keep in mind, video habits across different generations or targets are going to be key to make sure we continue to follow our audience wherever they're consuming. And then finally, measurement's going to be a huge focal point. As stacking and fragmentation continues, advanced measurement becomes imperative.